Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the 5 Million Milestone podcast. I'm your host, Matteo, and today we are diving into a topic that's crucial for any small business looking to scale, building a strong sales process. Now, I know, of course, you might be thinking, oh, great, another sales lecture. But stick with us because we are approaching this from a fairly fresh angle. We're going to explore how small and medium-sized businesses can learn from the big players in the enterprise world to scale their growth. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest expert who's going to help us crack this code. Joining us today is Roger Williams, an outbound account executive at Kinsta. Roger, thanks for being here with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
Fantastic. I have the feeling our listeners are in for some real gems of wisdom from your experience in enterprise sales. And of course, I'm not alone in picking Roger's brain today. My co-host Pierre is here as well. Pierre brings his expertise as a marketing manager at Pronto Marketing, and I'm sure he's got some killer question up his sleeves as well. Hey, Pierre, how are you?
Hi, Matteo. Hi, Roger. I'm very excited for this podcast and ready to dive in. Rogers, one of the key things we want to do today, like Matteo mentioned in the opening, is learn from the big guys, right? And you have experience as well as a small business owner, working in marketing as well, working in SEO and in media. So I think there's a lot of things that you've done before that will be applicable to our listeners. In addition to what you're kind of doing now in a sales focused role in a bigger company like Kinsta. And I think one of the things we kind of tend to see is that SMBs make the mistake to sell to everyone. And, I think this is a very common one. We've all been there. We're all struggling with it every day. We see it a lot in our accounts. But really what we see the most successful companies do very well is being entirely focused on the niche. And for example, Kinsta was and is generally 100% focused on WordPress. And that's kind of, a really good way to do effective marketing. That's one of the reasons we chose Kinsta. But we also see smaller companies that are laser focused. And, if we go back to the Pronto origins, that's kind of where we started, being 100% focused on a niche and allow us to grow all the way up to $5 million. And so I think this kind of brings us to sort of our first segment of the episode. And the question, that we want to cover first is sort of the ideal client profile. And so kind of we wanted to pick your brain and, in your experience in enterprise sales, what are some of the most critical data points and attributes that enterprise sales team use to kind of build such an ideal client profile that then allows to have that laser focus?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Pierre. And I love the sentiment of, hey, when you talk to a client to help them start figuring out their marketing and sales approach, hey, who's your customer? Who's your ideal customer? And that answer of, oh, everyone. And, it's like fingernails on the chalkboard, right? Because you're like, no, we don't have enough money to target everyone in the planet, And so the ideal client profile or customer profile, whichever way you want to talk about it, is definitely a great first step for that approach. And, the good news is a lot of the times business owners already have this started and they're not even aware of it because they've created a product to answer some sort of question. And so they already have a customer in mind from the beginning, and it might be them, right? A lot of the times they have to come up with a solution for some problem in their business. And they're like, oh, I'll turn this into a business. And so, coming from the enterprise level and looking at it, there's not a lot of differences, right, between a big company and a little company kind of looking at this, except for budget, right? So there's a lot of things to start looking at, right? Start thinking of, who did you build this product for? And then extrapolate from that. Okay, so what does that company look like? Are they a big company? Are they a little company? Are you talking to the CEO? Or do you just need to talk to a manager or even an end user, right? If you're selling a product that's for a developer, you want to start thinking about, okay, who is that developer? What are some of the titles that they're looking at? And now you can start targeting that in your approach. I like to use LinkedIn Sales Navigator. You can look for specific titles and start really breaking that down. But going even further with the ideal customer profile, start looking at, who is that business? What are their challenges? What are they trying to solve? And from that, you're now going to build the rest of your sales process. So it's really important to take the time at the beginning, and you're asking for specific data points. Obviously company size in terms of number of employees as well as total revenue. These are good numbers to start looking at, because when you start using tools like LinkedIn Sales Navigator, these are the filters you can start plugging in there to actually start finding individuals to target. So having some specific data about who the company is, what their market is, who they're trying to sell to, and start really building that, imaginary profile, but make it into a real person. And I'm going to ramble a lot. So, I want to pause for a second, make sure I'm making sense here, and see what else you want to go with that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, Roger. Maybe one follow up to this would be, how rigid should a company be when, they have first identified their ideal client profile? And I would imagine, like you said before, like the budget is probably the big difference between a bigger and an enterprise company and a smaller business. Uh, but even in the case of Kinsta, like Kinsta is essentially just focus on targeting a very defined segment of the market, right? WordPress websites. So how much flexibility do you think small businesses should have when they have first identified their client profile, their ideal client profile, and sort of like, can there be some sort of leeway in terms of who they are actually going to eventually target when they start, their sales program?
Yeah, great question. And I would say a lot of flexibility, right? It's, there's the old saying of like, every great plan is amazing until you hit the battlefield, right? And same thing with the ICP. You can have the most beautiful ideal customer profile. His name is Franz, and he, has an amazing haircut, and everything about this. And then you take that to market and you start actually trying to get customers, and you realize, wait, Franz is not the ideal customer at all. It's actually Sarah, and you need to make adjustments. And so that, I think, is a really important aspect of the ICP, is that it's an evolving, organic, it's a persona, right? So it's actually based on people. So it needs to be able to change. And some of the big data points that you want to look at is your existing customers. And so, when you're a brand new business, it's hard to look at your existing customers because you might not have many. But as you get more customers, you need to be talking to them. You need to be getting feedback from them, because you might get customers who aren't your ideal customers who are taking up a ton of your support time. You might want to question if that is going to be your ideal customer. Customers who can't afford your product, that's going to be a problem. And so as you're going, you should always be referencing back, maybe once a month, at least once a quarter, I would say, of going, okay, hey, look, we've got this ideal customer profile, but now we've actually gotten more customers. Of these customers, who are we making the most money from? And, that's a great metric to look at. Support time is something you want to calculate in. If you're spending 4 hours a day talking to that customer, you're losing money. And so that you might not have good alignment there with that customer, or maybe you need to adjust your product or service to better fit the customers. So there's lots there. There's lots to review. And as we kind of talk more about the sales process, we're going to see how you're always referencing back to the ICP and making changes. So great question.
And so to your point, the ICP isn't something that just sits either with marketing or just with sales, but you kind of have to look at sort of the big picture of it and kind of get more people involved in order to have that sort of fuller picture. So yeah, no, I think that was a very insightful piece of advice there.
No, and I think that's a great point as well, Pierre, is the ICP is not sales's, it's not marketing's, it's the company's. And you need to also get other departments in there. Bring in your support team, bring in your product team, and show them, hey, look, this is what we're thinking, this is what we're doing, the support team's going to have amazing insights, right? And you might be the support team, right? If it's a small enough company. But think of those interactions with the customer. I mean, that's immediate feedback that you should be applying to your sales and your marketing campaign. And product, right? They should be involved. If customers are getting hung up on the onboarding, product needs to know about that because maybe something needs to be changed in there. And again, I realize not all companies are going to have all different people in this, but if you're handling all those roles, you should keep in mind, hey, this applies to all of those.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I really liked is just kind of accepting that, it's an ideal client profile. Don't get hung up on it, evolve. And I think this is where the sales team can be really helpful in that process, because you speak to so many prospects, and that's where sometimes you can get the faster validation of, hey, is what we built or like what we put together, is that actually, the rubber hitting the road there, and grounded in some real person.
Absolutely. Getting the sales team's feedback, it baffles me still to this day to see sales teams that don't ask their salespeople for input about these strategy level decisions. Like you said, they're the ones actually talking to the prospects every day, and they're going to be able to give you feedback about a lot of things. I think also this is where, and maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit, but one of the technologies that I really like nowadays is these note taker apps that you'll see when you get onto Zoom calls and Google Meets. These are recording apps, right? They're recording the call. But there's amazing technology available. I think Avoma is one that I've seen recently that has a lot of AI built in, and it analyzes the call and pulls out a lot of information in there. And if you have that, you as a manager can quickly go in and see how that call went. You can watch the whole thing if you have the time, and really help to analyze and, again, feedback into this ICP and make it dynamic.
Yeah, no, I exactly know what you mean. Our sales guy uses an app called Fireflies, and he used to send us those like Zoom call recordings, and no offense to Zoom, they're it's useful for other things, but for reviewing sales calls, it wasn't always the the simplest and easiest tool. But now with you not only have the transcript, you can, like you said, the AI can help extract information or snippets, and just so advanced, and you can go straight to the exact piece of information that you're looking for. So yeah, some amazing tools out there to help, marketing teams or even the managers of salespeople.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Roger, maybe shifting gears a little bit here. I just want to know from somebody who's working in an enterprise company, but maybe even earlier in other roles, how much is your sales process defined and documented, and how much you're rather like molding it as you go and then sort of refining it day after day?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I found that, at Kinsta, I've got a really great management team that helps with the operations side of things, and really helps, look at, hey, did you notice that you're using this sequence? Did you notice that this email is working very well, and things like that? And so I'm getting better at going back and looking at my process and refining it. I would say earlier on in my career, it was definitely throwing all the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. There's a lot of motivation involved in sales, right? It's hard. Let's just admit it at the beginning of the day. Sales is a difficult sport. It's a contact sport, and there's a lot of rejection. So it's a lot like dating is something I commonly talk about. At least dating for me, I faced a lot of rejection in my dating life before I met my wife. And so in sales, it's the same thing. And you want to make sure you're spending time to build a process, but then also being flexible with your process and understanding, hey, when you get a certain conversation with somebody and it's a strong no, it might be time to put that into a nurture mode and maybe revisit it in a couple of months. rather than just beating your head and getting the person more upset, possibly. Obviously you want to avoid that completely. So building a sales process is definitely something I recommend. Practice what you preach is definitely, the difficult part here, because again, you're trying to just move as quickly as possible. You're trying to get that list of prospects and then hit all of them. I think using tools like HubSpot are amazing. Apollo, I've played a little bit with, but HubSpot is obviously the grand champion currently, unless you want to spend a ton of money on Salesforce. And in HubSpot, you can build your sequences. And I was just listening to a sales podcast where the guy was saying he doesn't use sequences because they make it feel too robotic. I like to use sequences to remind me that I need to reach out to the person again. And I do not use any automation in my sequences. So in HubSpot, you have the ability to automate the emails that go out in a sequence. And I think this feature has been way overused in the last few years, to the point where we've saturated the market with way too many robotic emails going out. And so my approach is I create a sequence. Usually I'll do something like 4 to 6 touches in a sequence, right? And so a touch is I send an email, or I make a phone call, or I connect on LinkedIn or Twitter. And so I'll have, 4 to 6 of those in a, 1 to 2 week period. I'll spread them out. And again, this is where the ICP really informs how you should pace this sequence. If it's an individual contributor you're going after, a developer just sitting on the front line, you probably want to space things out maybe a little bit more than an executive, because an executive's attention span, right, is very short. They're super busy. They're doing a lot of things every day. And so if you tighten up your sequence for an executive, maybe it can help get their attention and get them to respond. But again, throw all the rules out the door and flip that around and play and, try it one way for a little while, and then, take a look and see if it's working or not. And then, try flipping the sequence. And this is a really nice feature in HubSpot. You can easily duplicate entire sequences, name them slightly different. You can do A/B testing within the sequence. And again, finding your process. Are you an emailer? Are you a caller? Not everybody likes doing cold calls. I'll admit I cringe when I have to do my calls for the day sometimes. And it's like, just taking your medicine and I got to get through this. Social selling is huge now, right? LinkedIn I'm having a lot of success using LinkedIn as an ability to prospect people. At a minimum, learn about them, learn what they're posting, who they're connected to. And then I also find it's a nice additional social proof on top of, me reaching out with my email from Kinsta. There's a little bit of validation there. But if I connect with you on LinkedIn and you see, maybe we have a shared connection, you can see where I've worked. That will just help build a little bit more credibility and maybe have the person talk to you. So getting a little bit into the weeds right there, but yeah, sales process is definitely something to pay attention to. There's a ton of great resources. I wish I had all of the resources that are now for free on LinkedIn. I know there's like kind of an online joke about B2B sales posts on LinkedIn and being a little ridiculous, but there are some really good people out there who have got some really good advice and just motivation. I think motivation is one of the biggest things of sales, like finding some way to get motivated to make those 30 calls and know that, you might get 30 no's in a row. And how are you going to keep your motivation up and keep coming back to it? So great question. I hope I answered it somewhat.
Absolutely. I really like how you tied sort of, finding that balance in your automation process and the sequences and the ICP, right? So, and really adapting that process to that. I think, it's very clear that we talked about ICPs and we're sort of talking about, one ideal client profile, but maybe that's a bit more of one company type, but within a company, there may be different buyer types depending on that company size, or there may be the decision maker, and then there may be the influencer. So you may be at different times, you may be working with someone who's more of a developer, more of a technical person. And at other times you're talking to a business owner who's more focused on financials and just kind of general business, impact rather than just all the details. And so messaging in a different way makes sense. I'm curious to hear from you on how, because you said you don't, just send out those sequences automatically, but I assume you're still using templates, right? And even though you're customizing thing, from what I know from HubSpot CRM, you still, one of the great features I think is just that ability to have that template library in there. Is that a tool that you still leverage? Um,
Yeah,
and then do you
absolutely.
customize
So
essentially those?
I absolutely use templates, but I personalize almost every single one that goes out.
Gotcha.
And I think, this kind of ties into a couple of things we're talking about here is, first of all, multi-threading, just to back up a second there, where you're
Hmm.
talking about approaching different people in a company. At the enterprise level, this is absolutely an essential skill to be using, because that inline worker, that developer, is probably not going to be able to make the purchase decision that you need done. It might be their manager, it might be their VP. For smaller businesses, if you're approaching these larger companies, you want to start thinking about this and this multiple profile approach. And again, tying it all the way into HubSpot, or there's lots of software out there now that has templating and sequencing, but definitely sit down and create a sequence based on the person you're reaching out to. And then your templates will already have a little bit of personalization, kind of, general personalization for the position. But then you want to make sure you're absolutely putting in at least a sentence or two that have shown you, or shown the prospect, that you've done some research about them, definitely about their company, definitely about their industry, and make sure that there's some uniqueness in there, because we all see our inboxes every morning and they're full of emails, and we don't even necessarily want to answer the emails that we need to answer, let alone somebody's strange email about some product or service that you may have never even heard of. So really, again, going back to the ICP will help you build empathy for the customer and really start to understand what they're facing on a day-to-day basis in their job. And that's going to translate directly into your templates and your sequencing, and then your conversations of, hey, I understand, you're probably stressed a lot about your WordPress updates, and just to kind of, steal from the Kinsta playbook a little bit here, with staging environments and backups, we've got you covered so you can make these updates safely, and really making sure that I'm talking to somebody's specific pain point there. And that's going to get their interest. That's going to get their attention. Like, oh yeah, I got yelled at last week for, taking somebody's site down, doing an update. It'd be really great to avoid that in the future. So.
Yeah, it's great you mentioned the playbook. That sort of ties in with my next question. And like you talked earlier about, going from throwing spaghetti against a wall, when you're in your really early days. And I think as, when you start a new business, that's sort of a lot of what happens, unfortunately. And but kind of moving away from that, you started talking about documentation, and like at what stage would you recommend someone kind of getting into sort of that documentation process and kind of putting together a sort of a more formal playbook to a certain extent? When do you see that sort of being, how soon would you start that? And then, yeah.
I would say try and start thinking about this from day one. And I think, again, the big change from, when I started, it was all pencil and paper. I started doing door-to-door office supply sales. Like, it was brutal. And there was no CRM helping me to track or remind me of the conversations I had. Now, with all these CRMs, with the emails tied into them, you can use AirCall to call your calling into it. Everything's getting documented into your CRM, and you should be going back and reviewing that. And you should take the additional step and start creating some documentation. And I think this, again, starts from the ICP, right? You're starting with the ICP, you're starting your documentation process. Now you can start extrapolating that into your sales playbooks, and how you're building the playbook specific to the ICP, right? There's some general frameworks that you're using, such as outreach, discovery calls, quote preparation, closing, post sale. That's the general framework of a sales, right? But each sale is unique, especially to the ICP. So start at least just making some notes. Google Docs. This is where I love Google Docs. I just create a new Google Doc and I start throwing things in there. And then as it starts evolving, maybe I'm taking it, putting into my documentation software if I'm using something, or it just stays in the Google Doc. I mean, keep it simple, keep it cheap, use the tools that you already have access to, especially when you're starting out. And then as time goes on, you're going to be able to refer back to the playbook and back to the ICP and see what's working and what's not working and make changes and adjustments. Also, by doing this, when you do make changes and you go to your sales team, because there's one thing that sales teams do not like is change. If you've got things documented and you now approach your sales team with any changes to the approach, you can point to specific areas of why you're making these changes, and you can help the sales team understand why you're making those changes. So documentation, again, practice what I preach, preach what I practice. It's hard, right, to do this, because especially if you're running a business, you have so many things to be focused on. Documentation is usually the last thing we want to focus on, but that's of course we know a huge mistake. So figure out a way to start documenting and help your team to document, right? We talked about the sales recording tools, using the CRM, making sure they're putting notes into the CRM. That's all going to help you now go in and look and create the documentation from. So it starts from the beginning.
Yeah, and if you want to, hire a new salesperson, that documentation that you've done, will be super beneficial for onboarding and kind of getting someone up to speed.
Exactly.
So it's really all about scaling as well, and your ability to kind of eventually hand off some of that sales process to a new person who's dedicated in sales and not necessarily as knowledgeable as perhaps the owner.
Exactly. And I think, this brings up the unique concept in sales, is that you need to make it not complicated. You in sales, we'll get an ego, right? Because we're closing these deals and we're like, I'm the greatest salesperson of all time. If you have that attitude, it's going to be hard to train new people, right? Because there's maybe a chance you find that one person who is exactly like you and is super motivated and inherently understands what your process is. But more likely than not, you're going to get somebody who probably doesn't understand your industry. They're looking for a job to make some money, and they've got a lot of enthusiasm. If you've got this documentation, if you've got this playbook to be able to sit them down and walk them through, hey, look, here's the entire process. Here's the why. Here's how. And all you need to do to be successful is follow this and do as best as you can. And then as the owner, you're now the coach. And you need to make sure you're taking that coaching mentality of, okay, are they at least following the process? Great. Now, once they've got the process down, now you can start, focusing on technique and, hey, maybe ask the question in a negative way to start getting them to say no earlier. If those little things are very secondary. The first thing is just doing the process, doing the outreach, and following the techniques that you've created to help them personalize that outreach. But that's a great point. When you're bringing on new people, making it really easy for them to just fit into the process and start doing it.
And I guess, along this sales process, there's also sort of a component in which, as a salesperson, you're actually trying to quantify and communicate the value of the product or service that you're selling to the prospect. And I'm pretty sure you've probably come across cases where the prospect you're talking to or emailing are maybe just asking you straight away or very early in the whole process how much is it going to cost them, and that comes way earlier than you were expecting, way earlier than you were able to prove how much the product or service that you have in your hands is worth, right? So how do you react to something like this?
Yeah. So how much is it? This is definitely a question that you see a lot more in inbound sales, because the customer, by the time they've inbounded, right, and filled out the form or started the chat with you, they've already done a bunch of research. I think the last stat I saw is they're 70% of the way through your sales funnel by the time they've reached out to you. And so getting that sales question right away is very common. In outbound sales, it also comes up quite often. And there's definitely that moment of like, oh, geez, I haven't gotten through all my pitch deck yet. You can't ask that question. And this is where, as a salesperson, you need to learn to become adaptable, and make sure you're having a conversation with the person. At the end of the day, you do want to sell it for a price, right? The whole purpose of sales is to make money. So you shouldn't be afraid of this question. And in fact, you should welcome it, because this is the whole point of us having a sales conversation. But there's a couple of ways to approach it. The first one is a qualifier, right? If you're selling a product at maybe a premium price, you can use this as a way to qualify away a lead that's not going to fit, right? If they're looking to spend $100 and you're charging $1,000, you kind of want to get that conversation over with and out the door so you can move on to the $1,000 conversation. So, how much is it? Like giving a range, right? Well, usually we start at about $1,000. It goes all the way up to $10,000. Is that within your budget, right? And you can quickly kind of get through those. This is where also making sure that you've done that ICP at the beginning can help, qualify away, even reaching out to people that are going to be price averse on that. But then, also taking a step back for a second, and admitting or agreeing with them, hey, it sounds like price is an important thing for you here. Is that the most important thing that you're considering? Because if it is, now again, you're qualifying that lead. If someone's just looking at price, is that going to be a great customer for you? Are they going to sign up with you and then in 3 months move to the next lowest price thing that's out there? So, there's nothing wrong with qualifying a lead either out or just lower, right, in your priority system based on their aversion to price or their ability to have budget. Now, getting back to that question, is price the most important thing? Most of the time, or not most of the time, but a lot of the time, it's not going to be the most important thing. And they're going to admit it. And now you can start diving into your discovery questions more, right? Because if they're bringing up reliability or security, or growth, right? If they're hiring you to do marketing for them, price shouldn't be their biggest concern. Growth should be their biggest concern. And so again, you're now qualifying if this is a lead you really want to pursue or not. Because again, if they don't know what they're focused on, if they're not focused on growing and you're going to sell them marketing services, then it's not a good fit, at least at that point. And so you can be honest with them of just, hey, it sounds like price is your biggest concern. I'm going to be honest. We're not the cheapest. We're not, we're here to put out a really good product or service. We're here to grow your company. We're here to make good partnerships. Is that of interest to you? And if they say no, then they can go to Wix. They can go to Squarespace. They can spend as little money as possible and get as little results as possible. And you've now qualified that out and you can move on to your next prospect.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because as you're trying to scale your business and grow, often, you do need to end up getting bigger deals in the door. And so you have to sort of evolve your pricing, your selling framework rather, so that you're not just, forever selling on price. And so eventually it's about customizing your offering a bit more, especially in the professional services kind of area, whether you're a marketing agency or whether you're an IT services company, it's about adding more value eventually. So sort of moving away from those, pricing features and sort of the more of a value-based sale. Have you found any particular framework helpful in that area? Are there any particular sales tools that you rely on?
A lot of this is intuition and just, as you're doing sales, you start picking up on what works for your business and your market and your industry. There are a lot of frameworks. There's value-based selling, there's account-based selling. There's a lot of these different frameworks that are out there, and they're very interesting, and I highly recommend you Google them, you read about them, learn as much as you can about the sales process. The thing about sales is that it is not a science. There's a lot of people who have tried to apply science to it, but at the end of the day, it's people buying and selling from people, and people are very fickle. We have good days, we have bad days. Maybe our dog is sick, so we're distracted. And so the best thing that I can really recommend as a salesperson is go and learn as much as you can. Sign up for all the podcasts. Listen to marketers, listen to salespeople, listen to customer support people, listen to product people. As a salesperson, you cannot know enough. There's typically the training for a salesperson is we want to be light on the technical details of the product and just, really focus on learning how to sell and have conversations with people. And I think that that's important, but I think it's just as important to really learn about your product and learn about your industry and be able to be quick with your answers to people's questions. And that's going to show value, right? You want to start showing value in your first conversations with them. You want to show them that, you know their name. That's a really good start. You know the name of their company. You know what their company does. You know what the last press release or blog post that the company put out. You want to know what their CEO just posted about. And these are how you're going to be able to show value in the conversations. As far as building a framework goes, again, I urge caution a little bit. I'm not the operations side person, right? So I'm not someone that really argues for frameworks. I get excited about them. I'll learn about value-based selling, and I'll want to talk to everybody internally about it. And then operations will start kind of implementing stuff. And there can be a disconnect. There can be a problem there where they've started to set up these automations in HubSpot or something, and I'm getting, tasks that I need to do. But I know the account maybe a little bit better than the framework does. And so making sure that you're building in some flexibility into your sales framework, I think, is really important. It's not always a black and white situation with sales. In fact, it's almost never a black and white situation. It's almost always technicolor. Everybody's different. Every client's going to be different, and you want to be able to adjust to that. But also, be able to communicate value is very important too.
Yeah, I definitely get what you mean about the sort of the people to people part of the sale and the fact that it's actually fairly emotional. And I think, my experience from having bought different software or services, or even observing how we internally buy different services, you do see the impact of how did that sales or that person or rep made you feel. And, did they get you? Did they take the time to actually understand what your company is trying to do? Are they speaking back to you in the same language? And so reassuring you that, this is the right decision, or they care about my business. And if they care now, there's a higher chance that they'll care later. If they don't care now, how they're going to ever care, Yep. So, I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, like you said before, maybe sales starts as a high impact sport, but it quickly transitions into almost like a psychological game or a sociological experiment where you really need to be able to empathize as much as possible with the person in front of you. And so it's almost like an invisible dance, right, between the salesperson and the prospect. And yeah, I mean, with every kind of client-facing role, I guess that's sort of the trick, and really about making sure that you can, as much as possible, put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're talking to.
Absolutely. And, I said contact sport earlier. And the reason that I use that metaphor at the beginning of sales is, especially if you're outbounding, right, and you're cold calling people, you're interrupting their day. And there's a variety of reactions you can get out of people by cold calling them in the middle of the day. And you need to be ready for that. And so that's where I mean with the contact sport. I'm not saying that when somebody like yells at me, I yell back at them. Absolutely not, right? The dance, I love that, is an even better metaphor. And in my head, I played ice hockey growing up, so I'm thinking of switching from ice hockey is now you want to start thinking of it as paired figure skating, right? Yeah. And you're working together, and as the salesperson, it's really your job to be flexible and adjust to what where they are, right? Especially when you cold call somebody in the middle of the day. My cold call line is, hey, my name's Roger. I'm with Kinsta. You're not expecting my call. Is this a good time to talk? Right. And so immediately I'm acknowledging to them that I've interrupted their day. And now I'm asking for permission, right? Hey, is this a good time? And there's a lot of times they say no, but hey, we can talk later and all of that. But, kind of getting back into the personal relationship part of selling, right? It's completely dating, right? You're trying to there is a goal, right? You're not just having a conversation to have a conversation. That's a friendship, that's hanging out at the bar. In sales, you are trying to get a deal closed. If that's today, that's great. If it's in 6 weeks, if it's in 6 months, if it's in 2 years, it is what it is. You are laying the groundwork towards that every single time you interact with the person. And you need to read off of them. Hey, is today the day that I push for the close? Or do we still need to get through a bunch of discovery? Do they need to see some more case studies? Do they need to, do I need to spell out the value more for them? So I need to get more information from them as far as, what they're at in their business currently. Are they hiring? What are they going through? And then, showing the empathy of, hey, wow, that's got to be a lot of work, and just talking to them. Sales is a conversation. And it's one of the reasons that I love sales, right, is you can immediately figure out if somebody's interested or not, even on a video call, right? You can see if they're wandering away, if they're looking over at this screen typing, they're obviously not listening to you. And so you can quickly adjust to that and just being honest. That's the thing I love about sales, right? Is you can do trickery and psyops and all these different things, or you can just be yourself and be honest with the person. And again, this ties all the way back into having a product that you're confident in and that you believe in. And as the owner, this is your job to get your employees infected with the belief that you have the greatest product and service ever, and that the ICP will absolutely benefit by getting this. And if you have that energy, that will come across in your conversations, and people will be attracted to at least listening to you and hearing more about it and discovering more. And then you're there as the salesperson to guide them through that and then get the deal. I don't know if we're running a little short on time, but talking about the actual sales part of sales, right? For now, we've talked all the way up to like getting that conversation going and identifying the person to talk to. And okay, so now what's happened? You've got somebody interested. You're talking to them. They love the product. They're very interested in the service. They want to hire you. Now you want to talk about pricing and negotiation. So my advice here is like, you should already have this figured out. You should already have figured out what your pricing needs to be, so that you can make money and you can grow by bringing on these clients. If you haven't looked at that yet, that's another subject that probably ties in a lot more with marketing. You need to spend time and have that figured out. So now when you're talking and you're quoting somebody, you can actually look at the entire project and figure out, okay, if you want to accomplish these goals, we're going to need to do X, Y, and Z. That's going to take this much time. Here's the price. And the better you can explain that to the client, and as you're explaining it, making sure you're stopping, hey, does that make sense? Is what I'm talking about now making sense? Getting their buy-in at each step of that process is really key. And then, when you give them the price, you now have to gauge, like, hey, how did they act surprised by that? And this is why I really strongly recommend always having a call or an in-person meeting when you're presenting the pricing. To just email a quote over to somebody, that's one of the biggest mistakes I can imagine, because you want to get that initial reaction of them, like, ooh, are they surprised? Does it seem like it's a lot? Now you're going to need to be ready to really, dig in your heels and show the value more. Were they non-pulsed? Were they just like, yeah, okay, whatever, to the price? That's going to tell you that the next time you want to up your prices a little bit, right? If people have no problem with the pricing, you can probably charge more. And then, just getting the deal closed. There's hours we can talk about, the psychology behind closing a deal and techniques and things along those lines. But again, I think it just comes back to being honest with people and showing yourself. And as long as you've shown that value, they'll understand and they'll be on board, and you'll be off to the races.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one last question, since I know we're kind of running short on time.
Yeah.
But I like what you said about, making sure you get to present that quote and that proposal that you put together. What's your approach, just in very practical terms? Do you get that sort of call done on the last call before you send out that proposal, or do you do it via email? Do you just adjust based on that? I'm just curious, again, if you have like a very defined process, or is this something evidently that you do intentionally, but if you have a more flexible approach?
Yeah, no, when I initially present a quote to somebody, I want to be on a video call, ideally,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or I want to be in person, ideally, but I mean, that's just not the world anymore. I mean, I live in the
Yep.
middle of nowhere, so I'm not doing a lot of face-to-face, but I love having a video call. And then that way we get on the video call, we start talking, then I'll send them the link. Like, again, we're using HubSpot, so all the quotes are built in HubSpot. I can share the link to them. Sometimes I'll share a screen, but I like to also just send it to them so they've got it open on their computer. And then now I'm going to walk through the entire quote, and I'm going to go line by line. And this is where you really want to make sure you're adding good information into your quotes. You're really breaking down all the things that they're going to get by making this purchase. Again, that's going to allow you to reference back to it down the road. If questions come up about scope, you've got that document already defined that they agreed to and they signed. And then also, as you're walking them through this, you're now reminding them of all the things you talked about before in the discovery calls and everything that happened before. You're now going back through all of this repetitively on purpose and getting them to remember, oh yeah, I did have a problem with crashing websites. This free staging environment is going to save my life. And now they're thinking about all of these benefits. And so when you get to the price, they're not thinking about the price. They're thinking about all the things that this is going to solve for them. And that price, that's all I have to pay for this. Great, let's go. So really making sure I'm walking through, I'm getting their buy-in. If there's after that, if we're starting to, negotiate and going back and forth on, okay, well, we only want to do so many units, or, they want some slight changes to it. I'll read the room in those. If I've got like a pretty good relationship going with the person, I might just email the updated quote to them. If I'm feeling a little uncertain, I'll push for calls. When in doubt, push for a call, because again, you want to get that reaction. You want to see how they're initially responding, right? If they're wincing, that's, again, you need to go back and show the value some more. If they're fine with it, now you can feel a little more comfortable. At the end of the day, though, I do want to mention I'm a very superstitious person when it comes to sales. I do not consider a sale closed until the credit card or wire transfer or however the payment works. Once the payment comes through, that is now a won sale. Them signing the document in HubSpot is not a win, right? That's a committed to buy, but it's not a win until you have the money. In sales, always stay focused on the money. It's not all about the money, but the goal is the money. So make sure that you're always coming back to that North Star. Get paid.
Definitely. That's definitely a piece of the process that we, keep a very close eye on, and, always making sure we don't close a deal until like the credit card is there and we know it's a working credit card, even if, so 100% agree. Well, Roger, thanks so much for all the insights you shared. Really appreciated what you talked about the ICP and, kind of being flexible as well, kind of making sure you review that on an ongoing basis. I also really love what you said about, asking for permission when you're doing cold calling, and as well being transparent. Don't try to trick people, like you said. I think that goes a really long way, whether you're in sales or in marketing. And as well, and I think this really ties in with pricing, actually. And don't be afraid about addressing it early enough. Matteo and I are big believers that having a pricing page, and just like you said, if you don't want to reveal your entire pricing, or if it's too complicated, at least have some sort of range, and it will help qualify your prospects and save you time down the line for you and your prospects. So yeah, a big thanks for all of this. And how can people reach you if they want to get in touch?
Oh, geez. Find me on LinkedIn. I'm Roger Williams Media is my URL in the URL there. Roger Williams, there's a million of us, so that can be hard. And then at Kinsta, you can email me, roger@kinsta.com.
All right. Awesome.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Roger, for sharing your expertise today. I'm sure our listeners will find, ways to adapt many of these strategies to their own businesses. Thank you, Pierre, also for your questions. And to our listeners, I hope you found this episode as actionable as we have. As always, we'd love to hear from you if you find value in today's episode, and don't hesitate to leave us a review or reach out with your questions and comments. And of course, tune in the next time for more insights on how to reach that 5 million milestone. Thank you so much. Bye.